My husband disappeared without a trace 6 months ago, leaving nothing behind but a signed divorce paper on our kitchen island. For half a year, I thought he had run off with another woman to start a new life. But when I finally tracked him down, he was not living a life of luxury. He was hauling heavy bags of cement at a downtown construction site, covered in mud, and looking absolutely terrified. When I finally confronted him, the chilling secret he confessed about his family and what they had done in my name made my blood run cold. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your worth and intelligence. The heavy tread of my designer boots sank deep into the wet mud of the construction site. The loud roar of heavy machinery and the sharp shouts of laborers echoed off the half-built concrete walls surrounding us. I did not care about the dirty water ruining my expensive clothes. I only cared about the man standing exactly 50 feet away from me. Julian, my husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me only to vanish into thin air exactly 6 months ago. He was struggling to lift a massive, heavy bag of gray cement onto his tired shoulder. He looked incredibly thin, exhausted, and completely broken inside. It was a stark contrast to the pampered, wealthy son his mother Eleanor had spent her entire life raising. I walked right up to him with absolute purpose. The loud crunch of my heavy boots on the loose gravel made him turn around quickly. When his exhausted eyes finally met mine, all the warm blood drained instantly from his pale face. He dropped the heavy cement bag in complete shock. It hit the wet ground with a massive thud, sending a thick cloud of gray dust flying into the damp morning air. He looked exactly like a helpless deer caught in the bright headlights of an oncoming truck, terrified and completely pathetic. I did not scream at him. I did not cry a single tear. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my dark winter coat, pulled out the crumpled divorce document he had left on my pristine kitchen island, and threw it right at his muddy work boots. The white paper fluttered down slowly and landed perfectly in a dirty brown puddle right between his feet. "Maya," he stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "What are you doing here today? How did you possibly find me in this place? I am a senior forensic accountant, Julian. I track missing millions for massive federal agencies every single day. Did you really think you could easily hide from me just by getting a cheap under-the-table job paying in cash?" I stepped much closer, closing the small distance between us. My voice remained dangerously calm and steady. "You owe me a very detailed explanation right now. Why did you suddenly leave our home without saying a single word?" He looked around the busy site, frantically wiping his incredibly dirty hands on his torn blue jeans. "Please, Maya, you absolutely cannot be here right now. If they somehow find out you found me, they will completely ruin both of us forever. You really need to leave this place immediately before she sees you speaking to me." "Before who sees me?" I demanded, my remaining patience suddenly snapping in half. "Who exactly is they, Julian?" Before he could even attempt to answer, a very loud, angry voice boomed loudly from across the busy site. "Hey, lady, you absolutely cannot be back here right now. This is a highly restricted active work zone. Hard hats only allowed beyond the main gate." I turned around quickly to see a huge burly foreman stomping aggressively toward us, his round face bright red with pure anger. He pointed a very thick, dirty finger directly at my face. "You are officially trespassing on private property. Get back in your fancy black car and drive away immediately before I call the local cops to arrest you. And you, Julian, get back to work right this second or you are completely fired today." Julian flinched violently, instinctively, taking a very large step backward away from me. "Maya, please just go away now," he whispered desperately. I looked calmly at the angry foreman, taking in his highly aggressive stance and the specific company logo boldly embroidered on his bright orange safety vest. Apex Development Group. I smiled slowly, but it was definitely not a warm, friendly smile. It was the terrifying cold smile of a hungry predator who had just successfully cornered her latest prey. "Call the cops," I told the angry foreman, keeping my voice perfectly steady and totally relaxed. I would absolutely love to speak to them today. In fact, while we patiently wait for them to finally arrive, maybe we can deeply discuss the massive financial audit my accounting firm is currently running on Apex Development Group right now. The foreman stopped dead in his tracks, his highly angry expression instantly faltering in pure confusion. What exactly are you talking about right now? My given name is Maya. I am the lead financial auditor officially assigned to fully investigate the massive glaring discrepancies in your recent commercial zoning building permits. I crossed my arms tightly, holding his nervous gaze without ever blinking once. I already know that you have been illegally paying half your crew under the table in pure cash to avoid paying mandatory state taxes. I also know all about the serious safety violations you illegally bribed the city building inspector to completely ignore last month. So do you still want to call the local cops on me? Or do you want to give my husband the next 15 minutes off so we can talk? The foreman swallowed hard and quickly stepped away from me. He looked down at the muddy ground in total defeat. I held the power to destroy his entire business today. Take 30 minutes, he muttered, turning his back on us. I did not watch him walk away into the distance. I kept my cold eyes locked entirely on my husband. Move, I commanded, pointing toward a narrow, damp concrete alleyway. Julian stumbled forward, dragging heavy work boots through the mud. He looked exactly like a guilty man walking toward execution. We finally reached the dark shadow of the secluded alley. He collapsed against the wet wall, sliding down the concrete. He buried his dirty face in his trembling, cold hands. Julian sobbed loudly, sitting right there in the wet dirt. It was an incredibly pathetic sight for a grown man. Stop crying and start talking right now, I commanded sharply. My voice echoed loudly off the narrow gray concrete walls. Why did you leave those papers on my pristine counter? Why have you hidden in this filthy place for months? Julian wiped his running nose with his dirty gray sleeve. I did not want to leave you, Maya, he choked. His chest heaved violently as he gasped for cold air. I swear I never wanted to leave our beautiful home. I did not run off with another younger woman, Maya. Then why are you sitting in the mud right now? I demanded, crossing my arms tightly against the cold wind. He took a ragged breath, refusing to meet my eyes. My mother and Chloe were the ones who made me. They forced me to disappear and never contact you again. Hearing my sister-in-law name made my jaw clench. Chloe was an entitled, wealthy woman who hated my background. She constantly reminded me I did not belong with them. What exactly did Chloe and Eleanor force you to do? I asked, my tone dropping to a very dangerous whisper. Julian pulled his muddy knees tightly against his shaking chest. They desperately needed a massive amount of money, he confessed. His older brother David made a terrible investment last year. He lost millions, and the family estate was heavily mortgaged. Chloe was absolutely desperate to maintain her high society image. She told my mother they needed an instant cash injection. If they failed, they would lose absolutely everything they owned. And what does their massive financial ruin mean for me? Why did you have to abandon your own loyal wife? I pressed, stepping closer until my boots touched his shoes. They took out a massive commercial real estate loan together. $8 million to buy an empty plot of land. They used a newly created shell company to hide everything, but they could not get the huge loan approved themselves. David ruined his credit and my mother tied her assets. They needed a pristine credit profile to secure federal funding. A freezing cold wave of realization violently crashed over me. I am a senior forensic accountant with a perfect score. I also hold a highly respected federal security clearance level. They used my identity, I stated, feeling pure furious adrenaline. Julian nodded weakly, keeping his sad eyes glued to dirt. Chloe forged your signature on all the official banking documents. She used her wealthy family connections at the regional bank. She bypassed the standard security checks to approve the loan. She told the bank manager you were entirely aware then. They leveraged your spotless financial record to steal $8 million. And then what exactly happened to the stolen loan money? I asked, my voice remaining eerily calm despite the truth. They immediately transferred the federal funds to secret offshore accounts. Julian cried loudly, gripping his messy hair in total despair. Chloe and my mother drained the shell company account completely. In less than 48 hours, the stolen money vanished. When the massive monthly loan payments inevitably default next week, the regional bank will immediately trigger a serious federal investigation. But they will not look at Chloe or my mother. The entire shell company is registered strictly under your name. You are the sole guarantor and the only criminal target. Everything suddenly clicked perfectly into place inside my sharp mind. The sudden disappearance and the total lack of daily communication. The neatly signed divorce papers left waiting on my counter. They did not just want to steal my perfect credit. They wanted to use me as the perfect innocent scapegoat. The divorce papers, I said, pointing at the crumpled document. That was their ultimate exit strategy to completely frame me. Julian nodded, sobbing much harder now as the truth spilled. Chloe said, if we filed for divorce and I vanished, it would make you look incredibly guilty to the authorities. It would look exactly like you stole the $8 million. Then you aggressively drove your loyal husband away from home. They told me if I did not play along obediently, they would plant false evidence to ensure I was arrested. I would go to federal prison right alongside you, Maya. They gave me $5,000 in untraceable paper cash. They told me to never ever contact you ever again. I stood there in the freezing, damp, narrow concrete alleyway. I looked down at the weak man I had married. He cowardly abandoned me to face a massive fraud charge, all because his elitist family wanted to protect their wealth. Most wives would have collapsed in the thick, wet mud. Most women would have panicked at facing decades in prison. But I did not shed a single tear for him. I did not scream or rage at his massive betrayal. Instead, I felt the corners of my mouth slowly curve. A sharp, dark smirk formed perfectly on my cold face. Chloe and Eleanor truly thought they were incredibly smart women. They thought because I grew up in a working neighborhood, they could easily use me and discard me like trash. I turned my back on my sobbing husband without uttering another single word. Let him sit in the cold mud and cry over his own pathetic choices. I walked briskly out of the filthy alleyway and climbed back into my sleek black SUV. I slammed the heavy door shut and started the engine. I did not drive back to my empty, quiet house to cry or pack my bags. I pulled up my digital calendar on the dashboard display. It was exactly 11 in the morning on a Sunday. I knew exactly where my elitist mother-in-law and my vicious sister-in-law were right now. Every single Sunday, without fail, Eleanor and Chloe hosted a lavish high society brunch at the extremely exclusive Heritage Pines Country Club. It was a highly restricted, predominantly white establishment where membership cost more than most people made in a decade. I gripped the leather steering wheel tightly and stepped heavily on the gas pedal. The drive to the luxurious country club took exactly 20 minutes. I did not bother changing my clothes or cleaning my dirty boots. I pulled my large vehicle right up to the front entrance, completely ignoring the shocked valet attendant, who rushed forward to open my door. I tossed him my keys and marched straight up the wide marble steps. The heavy glass doors slid open automatically, welcoming me into the grand lobby. The air inside smelled strongly of expensive floral perfume and old money. Conversations instantly stopped as I walked confidently across the pristine white marble floor. Wealthy older men in tailored golf shirts and women draped in designer pearls turned their heads to stare at me. A tall black woman with wet mud caked on her boots was definitely not their usual Sunday morning scenery. The severe-looking blonde hostess rushed out from behind her mahogany podium to block my path. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "This is a private member-only club. You absolutely cannot be in here right now." I simply sidestepped her without even breaking my quick stride. "I know exactly where I am going," I replied coldly. I walked straight past the grand piano and pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors leading to the private dining terrace. The bright morning sunlight instantly hit my face. There were beautifully decorated round tables covered in crisp white linen and expensive silver flatware. Right in the very center of the luxurious terrace, sitting at the largest and most extravagantly decorated table, were my two favorite enemies, Chloe and Eleanor. They were laughing brightly while sipping their yellow mimosas, looking completely carefree and incredibly wealthy. Eleanor wore a hideous pink silk blouse, and Chloe wore a pristine white designer dress that probably cost more than Julian made in an entire year working at that filthy construction site. I walked straight toward their table, letting my heavy, muddy boots stomp loudly on the expensive imported terracotta tiles. The loud, aggressive sound made several wealthy guests turn around in their chairs. When Chloe finally saw me walking toward them, her bright fake smile instantly vanished from her pale face. Eleanor actually gasped out loud, raising a shaking hand to her pearl necklace. Maya, Eleanor hissed sharply, looking around the terrace in absolute panic. What on earth are you doing here, ruining our private family brunch? You look like an absolute homeless person. I stopped right at the edge of their table, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. I did not care that 30 rich strangers were openly staring at us now. I looked directly down at Chloe, who was slowly putting her crystal champagne flute back onto the white table. "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the suddenly quiet terrace. "You look incredibly relaxed for a woman who just committed massive federal bank fraud." Several people sitting at the surrounding tables openly gasped at my loud accusation. Chloe instantly stood up from her chair, her pale face flushing bright red with sudden anger and intense embarrassment. "Keep your loud ghetto voice down, Maya," she whispered aggressively, leaning across the table. "You are making a massive scene in front of our important friends. You never knew how to behave properly in civilized upper-class society. That is exactly why Julian finally left you. He could not stand your aggressive attitude anymore." I let out a sharp, dry laugh that echoed loudly across the open terrace. "Really, Chloe? Is that the pathetic story you have been selling to all your wealthy country club friends? Because I just had a very enlightening conversation with Julian about 30 minutes ago, in a filthy, wet alleyway downtown, where he is currently hauling heavy cement bags to hide from the federal authorities." Eleanor let out a loud, choked gasp, pressing her napkin against her mouth. Chloe glared at me with pure venom in her blue eyes. She quickly reached into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a crisp rectangular piece of paper. She slammed it down hard onto the table right next to my muddy boots. "I know exactly what you are trying to do here, Maya," Chloe said, her voice dripping with heavy racial microaggressions and total condescension. "You found out Julian left you and now you are completely desperate for cash. You people always try to shake us down when things get slightly difficult. That is a cashier check for $50,000. It is untraceable and clears immediately." I looked down at the pale blue check resting on the white tablecloth. $50,000. They really thought I was a cheap, ignorant woman who could be easily bought off and silenced with pocket change. "Take the money, Maya," Chloe commanded, crossing her thin arms defensively. "Take it and go right back to your own side of town where you actually belong. Sign the divorce papers Julian left you, and stay far away from our family. If you quietly disappear today, we will not ruin your little accounting career. But if you keep causing a loud scene here, I will personally make sure you never work in this entire state ever again." I stared at the check and then slowly shifted my cold gaze back up to her arrogant face. They thought they held all the power. They thought their white privilege and inherited wealth made them completely untouchable. I reached down and picked up the blue check, holding it between my fingers. Chloe smirked triumphantly, thinking she had easily won the battle. "See, Eleanor," Chloe said loudly enough for the other tables to hear. "I told you she would eventually take the handout. They always do when they realize they cannot win against us." I did not rip the check. I did not throw it back in her smug face. Instead, I carefully folded the paper exactly in half and slid it directly into my coat pocket. "Thank you for the generous contribution, Chloe," I said, flashing her a brilliant, dangerous smile. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my smartphone. Chloe watched me with a highly confused expression, clearly expecting me to walk away in defeat. Instead, I tapped the screen a few times and placed the device flat on the center of the white tablecloth right next to her half-empty champagne flute. I pressed the speakerphone button and waited, as the line rang loudly in the quiet country club air. Every single person sitting on the terrace was watching us now, completely captivated by the unfolding drama. A crisp professional male voice answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Maya. This is Richard from the Federal Compliance Division at First Heritage Bank. How can I assist you on this beautiful Sunday morning?" "Hello, Richard," I replied, keeping my voice bright and perfectly clear. "I am currently sitting with Chloe and Eleanor. I am holding a cashier check drawn from the newly formed Shell Company account. Could you please confirm the current status of that specific corporate account for me?" There was a brief pause, and the sound of rapid typing over the phone speaker. "Yes, of course, Maya. As per the legal documents you submitted 3 days ago, proving you are the sole registered guarantor and primary asset holder of that corporate entity, we have fully executed your executive order. All funds within that Shell account are currently frozen, pending a full forensic audit. No withdrawals, transfers, or cashier checks will be honored under any circumstances whatsoever." Chloe physically jumped in her seat, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned pure white. "What did you just do?" she hissed aggressively, leaning over the table. "You have absolutely no legal right to touch that money. It belongs entirely to our family." "Richard," I said, completely ignoring Chloe's angry outburst. "Did anyone attempt to authorize a $50,000 cashier check from that frozen account yesterday afternoon?" "Yes," Maya Richard replied calmly. "We flagged the transaction immediately. Since you placed the biometric fraud alert on your personal financial profile, we allowed the paper check to be printed strictly as physical evidence of attempted wire fraud. It holds zero monetary value. The account balance remains totally inaccessible to anyone other than you." "Thank you, Richard," I said, picking up my phone. "Please proceed with the immediate cancellation of all associated secondary credit cards linked to that compromised account. I will speak to you tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful Sunday." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my handbag. The heavy silence on the outdoor terrace was absolutely deafening. Eleanor was clutching her chest, taking short, shallow breaths, as if she were experiencing a massive heart attack. Chloe was staring at me with a completely unhinged expression, her mouth hanging wide open in pure shock. "You bypassed our corporate firewall," Chloe whispered, her arrogant tone completely gone, replaced by genuine terror. "You stole our money." "I did not steal anything, Chloe," I replied, leaning forward until my face was only inches from hers. "You used my legal name and my pristine credit history to open that illegal shell company. You completely forgot that as a senior forensic accountant, I get automatic federal alerts whenever my personal social security number is used to secure a massive commercial loan. You made me the sole legal owner of the company to frame me. So I simply walked into the bank 3 days ago, provided my legal identification, and took total lawful control of my own company. Your money is completely gone." Right at that exact moment, a young waiter in a crisp white uniform approached our highly tense table. He was holding a small black leather book containing the massive bill for their lavish Sunday brunch. He looked incredibly nervous, sensing the extremely heavy tension radiating from our table. "Your check for the champagne service, ladies," he said quietly, placing the black book carefully on the table. "The total comes to $3,200. Chloe snatched the black book aggressively, eager to assert her elite dominance and prove she was still extremely wealthy. She pulled a heavy platinum credit card from her designer wallet and shoved it onto the waiter's silver tray. "Charge it," she snapped viciously. "And bring me another bottle of your most expensive vintage immediately." The young waiter nodded quickly and rushed back toward the terrace bar. I simply stood there, watching Chloe try to regain her shattered composure. She crossed her arms and glared at me with pure hatred. "You think freezing one single account will destroy us, Maya?" she spat venomously. "My family has been incredibly wealthy for 4 entire generations. We have trust funds and offshore accounts you cannot even begin to comprehend. We will absolutely crush you in court for this massive insult." Less than 2 minutes later, the young waiter returned. He was walking very slowly, and his face was completely flushed with deep embarrassment. He held the silver tray out toward Chloe with a shaking hand. The heavy platinum card was sitting right on top of the unpaid bill. "I am so incredibly sorry, Mom," the waiter stammered nervously, avoiding her angry eyes. "Your card was completely declined. The system says the account has been forcibly frozen by the primary guarantor." Chloe snatched the card from the tray, her face turning a bright, violent shade of red. "Run it again!" she screamed loudly, making the young waiter flinch backward. "There is no maximum limit on that platinum card. You clearly made a stupid mistake." "I ran it 3 times, Mom." The waiter apologized softly, stepping away from the table. "It was definitely declined. Please provide another form of payment immediately, or I will have to involve the club management." Eleanor frantically dug into her own expensive purse, pulling out a gold credit card. "Here, use mine," she ordered, handing it to the terrified waiter. The waiter took the gold card and hurried away. He returned less than 1 minute later, looking even more apologetic and frightened than before. "I am deeply sorry, Mrs. Eleanor," he whispered, leaning down close to her ear. "Your card was also declined for suspected fraudulent activity. The club manager is currently walking over here right now to discuss the unpaid balance." Eleanor let out a loud, piercing scream of pure frustration, causing every single wealthy patron on the terrace to jump in their seats. "Security!" she shrieked wildly, waving her arms in the air. "Someone call security right now and remove this horrible, dangerous woman from our private club. She is aggressively harassing us and stealing our money." 2 large security guards in dark suits immediately began walking briskly toward our table. I did not panic, and I definitely did not run away. I calmly buttoned my dark winter coat, preparing to leave the luxurious terrace on my own terms. I looked down at the 2 miserable women sitting at the table. Their fake high society masks had completely melted away, revealing the ugly, desperate truth underneath. "You can scream for security all you want, Eleanor," I said, my voice slicing easily through her loud, dramatic crying. "But they cannot save you from the federal government. Since I froze the $8 million you stole, the massive monthly mortgage payment for your incredible family estate will bounce tomorrow morning. And because you used your beautiful luxury mansion as collateral to secure the fraudulent loan, the bank will officially initiate foreclosure proceedings. Enjoy your expensive champagne today, ladies." I smiled warmly, turning my back on them as the angry club manager finally arrived at their table, flanked by the large security guards. I did not wait to hear their pathetic excuses or watch them awkwardly try to explain their declined credit cards to the judgmental wealthy crowd. I simply walked away, my heavy boots making a highly satisfying sound against the imported tiles. Because the federal bank will be placing a massive, ugly foreclosure sign directly on your pristine green front lawn by Wednesday morning. Have a very nice day. I drove away from the country club that Sunday afternoon, feeling a brief sense of deep satisfaction, but I knew the war was far from over. Chloe was a woman who had never been told no in her entire privileged life. She was not going to simply surrender and accept defeat. By 8 o'clock on Monday morning, my brief moment of victory was completely shattered. I parked my car in the private garage beneath my accounting firm and walked toward the private elevator. A tall man wearing a cheap gray suit suddenly stepped out from behind a concrete pillar blocking my path. He held a thick stack of legal documents securely in his right hand. "Maya?" he asked, looking at a small photograph attached to his clipboard. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "You have been officially served," he said forcefully, shoving the heavy stack of papers into my hands before quickly walking away. I stood alone in the cold parking garage, looking down at the massive pile of legal threats. The cover page displayed the bold, intimidating logo of Sterling and Vance. They were the most ruthless, expensive, and aggressive corporate law firm in the entire state. They were the exact kind of high-powered lawyers who exclusively protected the generational wealth of the elite. I took a deep breath and stepped into the elevator, flipping through the thick pages as I rode up to my office. Chloe had not wasted a single second. She had weaponized her massive family wealth to hit me with a vicious multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit. The lawsuit officially claimed I had publicly humiliated her and maliciously lied about her finances, causing severe emotional distress and ruining her pristine social reputation. But that was not the worst part. There was also a strict temporary restraining order officially barring me from coming within 500 feet of Chloe Eleanor or the family estate. The legal documents painted a highly distorted, completely false narrative. They officially accused me of being a bitter, unstable, and deeply jealous woman who had maliciously hacked into their private accounts because I was angry my husband had suddenly left me. I walked through the double glass doors of my firm and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. My front desk receptionist, Jessica, was frantically typing on her computer while holding her office phone tightly against her ear. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Maya," she said, her voice shaking with pure panic. "The phones have been ringing non-stop since 7 this morning." "What is going on, Jessica?" I asked, walking quickly toward my corner office. "It is Vanguard Logistics and Horizon Medical," she explained, following closely right behind me. "Both of their chief financial officers called our office less than an hour ago. They are permanently terminating our forensic auditing contracts effective immediately." I stopped walking and turned to face her, feeling a sharp cold pain in my chest. Vanguard and Horizon were my two largest corporate clients. They provided nearly 40% of the total annual revenue for my entire accounting firm. Losing them both on the exact same morning was a catastrophic financial blow. "Did they provide a specific reason for the sudden termination?" I asked, maintaining my calm professional exterior despite the massive sudden pressure. Jessica nervously looked down at her tablet. "The chief financial officer of Horizon Medical specifically mentioned a highly disturbing rumor circulating through the local country club network this morning. He said he heard from a very reliable source that you are currently under active federal investigation for aggressively embezzling money from your own husband. He said the board of directors cannot risk associating their clean medical brand with an unstable, aggressive accountant who steals from her own family." My blood boiled instantly. Chloe was using her vast country club network to systematically destroy my professional career. She knew she could not legally access the frozen $8 million right now, so she decided to completely cut off my legitimate source of income instead. She was intentionally weaponizing the racist, angry black woman stereotype to make the wealthy white business community completely turn against me. She wanted to isolate me entirely. She wanted to drain my financial resources so I could not afford to fight her expensive lawyers in federal court. "Call them back right now," I instructed Jessica, walking into my office and throwing the heavy stack of legal papers onto my large glass desk. "Tell both of their offices that we officially acknowledge their sudden termination. Do not beg them to stay. Do not offer them any defensive explanations. Just politely close their corporate accounts and send them their final billing invoices today." Jessica looked incredibly worried. "But Maya, if we lose those two massive accounts, we will struggle to make our commercial rent payment next month." "We will survive this, Jessica," I promised her, staring out my large office window at the bustling city below. "Please hold all my incoming calls for the next 2 hours." Jessica nodded quickly and quietly closed my office door, leaving me completely alone. The immense pressure in the quiet room was almost suffocating. Chloe was actively trying to crush me under the massive weight of her inherited privilege. She wanted me to panic and surrender the frozen shell company account just to save my own accounting business. I sat down in my leather chair and pulled the threatening legal documents toward me. The lawyers from Sterling and Vance had included a formal settlement offer, tucked neatly at the very back of the thick pile. It stated that if I immediately unfroze the $8 million bank account and signed a permanent non-disclosure agreement, they would completely drop the defamation lawsuit and publicly clear my professional name. It was a blatant, illegal extortion attempt wrapped neatly in expensive legal terminology. They were heavily banking on my fear. They thought I would crumble under the intense pressure of losing my successful business and my hard-earned reputation. But they fundamentally misunderstood who they were fighting. I did not inherit my success like Chloe did. I built my entire accounting firm from the ground up, relying on nothing but my own sharp intellect and relentless determination. I reached for my desk phone and dialed the direct number for my own personal attorney. The war had officially moved from the country club terrace into the ruthless corporate battlefield, and I was absolutely ready to destroy their entire legal strategy piece by perfectly calculated piece. 2 days later, I walked into the massive glass-enclosed conference room at the downtown offices of Sterling and Vance. The room was designed to be intentionally intimidating. The long table was carved from a single piece of dark mahogany, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the city skyline. Sitting on one side of the massive table like a royal tribunal were Chloe Eleanor and Julian, older brother David. They were flanked by 3 older white men in extremely expensive custom-tailored suits. These were the high-powered senior partners of the law firm. I walked in entirely alone, carrying nothing but a single sleek red leather folder. I pulled out a heavy chair opposite them and sat down, placing the red folder neatly in front of me. I did not bring my own attorney. This absolute display of solitary confidence clearly unsettled the senior lawyers, but Chloe just smiled a highly arrogant, predatory smile. She looked at my empty side of the table and let out a soft, mocking laugh. "You could not even afford to bring a cheap public defender today, Maya," she asked, leaning back in her plush leather chair. "I guess losing those 2 massive corporate clients really hit your bank account hard this week." I did not respond to her petty taunt. I simply looked at the lead attorney, waiting for him to begin the mandatory mediation session. The oldest lawyer, a man with silver hair and a deeply condescending voice, cleared his throat and opened a thick, perfectly organized binder. "Miss Maya," he began, looking at me over the rim of his expensive reading glasses. "We requested this private mediation session today to offer you a highly generous alternative to total financial and legal ruin. My clients are incredibly merciful people. Despite the massive emotional damage and severe public humiliation you have caused this distinguished family, they are willing to offer you a highly beneficial compromise." I folded my hands on top of the dark wood table. "I am listening," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and emotionless. David shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair. He was a weak, greedy man who had squandered his own inheritance on terrible investments and high-stakes gambling. "Listen, Maya," David said, trying to sound like a tough, authoritative businessman. "We all know you are completely cornered right now. The federal bank is going to start asking very hard questions about that frozen $8 million by tomorrow morning. If you try to blame my mother or my wife, the authorities will instantly look at the paper trail. The shell company is exclusively registered in your legal name. You are the sole guarantor. You will definitely go to federal prison for a very long time." The lead attorney held up a single crisp sheet of paper. "We have drafted a highly comprehensive settlement agreement," he explained smoothly. "If you sign this legally binding document right now, you officially admit to a lesser charge of gross financial negligence. You will state on the official record that you poorly managed the corporate loan funds due to intense personal stress from your failing marriage. If you unfreeze the bank account and quietly transfer the $8 million back to my clients today, we will use our vast legal network to ensure you face absolutely zero jail time. You will lose your accounting license, of course, but you will keep your personal freedom. Furthermore, we will immediately drop our multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against you." Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the shiny mahogany table. Her blue eyes were completely cold and devoid of any basic human empathy. "It is an incredibly generous offer, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with deep racial condescension and elitist arrogance. "You should be extremely grateful we are giving you this rare opportunity. You grew up with absolutely nothing in a highly questionable neighborhood. When Julian married you, we kindly welcomed you into a world of immense wealth and high culture you never could have achieved on your own. We gave you a temporary seat at our prestigious table, But people like you always eventually ruin a good thing because you do not know how to behave in polite society. You got too greedy and too aggressive. Now it is time for you to understand your actual place in the real world. Take the deal, Maya. Accept your inevitable defeat quietly and go back to the cheap neighborhood where you actually belong before we truly destroy your entire life. Eleanor nodded slowly in total agreement with her cruel daughter-in-law. You should be thanking us for our incredible mercy, Maya Eleanor added, clutching her expensive designer handbag. We are saving you from wearing a cheap orange prison jumpsuit. Just sign the document and leave our distinguished family alone forever. I sat perfectly still, absorbing their incredible arrogance and disgusting racism. They genuinely believed their skin color and their inherited trust funds made them completely invincible. They thought my silence was a clear sign of absolute terror. They thought they had successfully backed a frightened, helpless woman into a dark corner. They expected me to reach for the silver pen sitting on the table and desperately sign my entire life away just to escape their vicious wrath. I looked directly at the attorney, then David, Eleanor, and finally Chloe. I did not yell or bang my fists on the mahogany table. I smiled. It was a terrifying smile that changed the entire atmosphere. You think you hold all the winning cards? I asked, my voice echoing softly. You brought 3 lawyers to intimidate me. You brought an illegal document expecting me to simply surrender my career. You thought I came alone because I was too poor to hire an attorney, or too frightened to defend myself against your family. I slowly moved my hands off the table and rested them on the red leather folder right before me. I slowly slid the sleek red leather folder across the polished mahogany table. It glided smoothly, stopping exactly in front of the arrogant silver-haired lead attorney. He looked down at it with a highly patronizing smirk, clearly assuming I had written a desperate counteroffer or apology letter. Go ahead and open it, I said, leaning back into my chair, crossing my arms. Consider it my official counter-proposal to your generous settlement offer. The older attorney let out a heavy sigh, adjusting his expensive glasses before flipping open the red cover. He expected to find my signature surrendering my entire life. Instead, his eyes landed on a massive stack of highly detailed financial spreadsheets, federal property deeds, and banking logs. His arrogant smirk instantly vanished. The deep wrinkles on his forehead deepened as he frantically flipped through the thick pages. His 2 junior partners leaned in closely, their eyes scanning the dense columns of forensic data. The heavy silence quickly shifted from arrogant confidence to suffocating tension. What exactly is this garbage? Chloe demanded, rolling her blue eyes. Are you trying to bore us to death with your stupid accounting math, Maya? Just sign our document and leave. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the pale face of the lead attorney. I want to talk about the incredible commercial real estate investment your clients made last month. I began, my voice projecting clearly across the room. The spectacular empty plot of land they purchased using my forged signature and an $8 million federal bank loan. David bragged about how Chloe had secured a brilliant deal through her elite connections. It is a brilliant deal, David snapped angrily, gripping the edge of the table. That land is situated perfectly near the new highway development. It will easily triple in value within 5 years. I let out a sharp, amused laugh. You really are incredibly stupid, David. Did any of you bother to run an environmental survey before signing the final purchase agreement? Of course not. You assumed your inherited wealth made you the smartest people in the room. I pointed a steady finger at the open red folder. Look at page 7 of my forensic audit. The lead attorney quickly flipped to the exact page, his hands visibly shaking now. That highly valuable land you purchased is officially classified by the Environmental Protection Agency as a Level 4 toxic Superfund site, I stated coldly. It was previously used as an illegal chemical dumping ground in the 1980s. The soil is heavily contaminated with highly toxic industrial waste. It is legally undevelopable. You cannot build a shopping mall or housing complex on it. You cannot even plant a single tree on it. It is literally worth absolutely $0. Furthermore, the federal government mandates that whoever legally owns that toxic land must immediately pay for its complete environmental cleanup. That will cost roughly $2 million out of pocket. Eleanor let out a loud, choking sound, clutching her diamond necklace. She turned her terrified eyes toward Chloe, who was staring blankly at the mahogany table. Chloe forced a weak, nervous laugh. "That does not matter, Maya," she said, trying to sound confident, but failing miserably. "Even if the land is totally worthless, the $8 million loan is still completely registered under your legal name. You are the sole guarantor of the shell company. You are still the one going to federal prison for defaulting on the payments. We already transferred the cash into our offshore accounts. We are completely safe." I leaned forward, resting my elbows firmly on the table. "That brings me to the second part of my official audit," I said, smiling directly into her terrified blue eyes. "Look at page 14, counselor." The lead attorney quickly turned the pages. He began reading the highlighted legal text and suddenly gasped out loud. He looked up at me with absolute horror in his old eyes. "You embedded a federal biometric lock clause," he whispered, his voice trembling with pure shock. "Yes, I did," I replied, maintaining my unyielding eye contact with the lawyers. 5 years ago, when I received my top-secret federal security clearance, I legally embedded a biometric fraud lock directly into my personal credit profile and social security number. It dictates that any commercial loan exceeding $50,000 requires my physical fingerprint and retina scan to be legally binding. Chloe, you thought forging my signature on a few pieces of paper was enough. You thought your wealthy banking connections could bypass standard security protocols. The older attorney wiped cold sweat from his pale forehead. "Because the biometric verification completely failed, the initial loan contract automatically triggered a null and void protocol under federal banking regulations," he explained to his confused clients, his voice rising in panic. "What does that mean?" David demanded, slamming his fist on the table. "Speak plain English, you idiot. It means the loan was issued under severe fraudulent pretenses," the attorney yelled back, losing his professional composure entirely. "And according to the specific federal clauses, Maya embedded the total financial liability does not default to the shell company. It immediately and automatically reverts directly back to the primary beneficiaries who physically received the stolen funds." The system tracked the exact routing numbers and the specific computer IP addresses used to authorize the offshore wire transfers. The heavy reality of my words finally crashed down upon the wealthy family. "The entire $8 million debt is no longer registered in my name," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "The federal banking system automatically reassigned the massive debt yesterday afternoon. It is now permanently attached to your personal social security numbers, Eleanor and Chloe. You are completely on the hook for the $8 million, plus the $2 million toxic cleanup fee." Chloe let out a loud, piercing scream of pure, unhinged rage. She lunged forward, trying to grab my face, but David quickly grabbed her shoulders. David struggled to hold his furious wife back as she thrashed violently against his grip. Her pristine blonde hair fell out of its perfect styling, and her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure desperation. "Let me go!" she shrieked, kicking her expensive heels against the heavy mahogany table. "I am going to destroy you, Maya. You cannot do this to me. I am a Sterling. My family built this city. You are nothing but a cheap accountant from the slums." I did not flinch or move a single inch from my comfortable leather chair. I simply watched her completely unravel. The 3 expensive lawyers were not yelling or threatening me anymore. Instead, they were frantically shoving their legal documents back into their premium leather briefcases. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with this massive, toxic mess. Miss Maya, the lead attorney, said, his voice completely devoid of its former arrogance. He refused to even look at Chloe or Eleanor. "We formally withdraw our settlement offer. Furthermore, effective immediately, Sterling and Vance will no longer be representing these individuals in any legal capacity whatsoever. We strongly advise you to contact federal authorities." He snapped his briefcase shut and practically sprinted out of the glass conference room, followed closely by his two panicked junior partners. They were abandoning a sinking ship, and Chloe was the heavy anchor dragging everyone straight to the dark bottom of the ocean. Eleanor finally found her voice. She stood up slowly, her knees visibly shaking beneath her designer silk skirt. She looked at her daughter-in-law with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You told me this was a completely foolproof plan." Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with intense fury. "You promised me your banking connections would bypass all the federal security protocols. You swore my assets were totally shielded behind the corporate veil." Chloe ripped herself out of David's weak grasp and glared at her mother-in-law. "Do not you dare try to blame this entirely on me, you old hag." Chloe spat viciously, adjusting her ruined designer jacket. "You were the one who authorized the initial wire transfers. You signed the federal paperwork alongside me to push the loan through faster. We are completely in this mess together." I calmly picked up my red leather folder from the dark table and stood up. I had accomplished exactly what I came here to do. I walked out of the heavy glass doors, leaving them to their toxic family meltdown. I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway toward the main elevator bank. There was a small complimentary coffee station near the glass elevators. I poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and stood casually near the closed elevator doors, waiting for my ride down to the lobby. Less than 30 seconds later, the heavy conference room doors violently burst open. Chloe marched out into the hallway, her face bright red with anger. Eleanor was walking right behind her, screaming at the top of her lungs, completely ignoring the strict professional decorum of the law firm. "You ruined my entire family!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice echoing loudly down the long corridor. "You arrogant, reckless, spoiled child! You thought you were so much smarter than everyone else just because your father owns a yacht club. You destroyed my financial legacy. You doomed my retirement. The federal government is going to take my beautiful luxury mansion and throw me out onto the cold street." Chloe stopped walking and spun around to face the older woman. Her eyes were wide with unhinged manic energy. "What legacy, Eleanor?" She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made David flinch. "You have absolutely no legacy left. Your pathetic dead husband gambled away half your fortune 10 years ago, and your useless son David lost the rest on terrible stock options. Your massive estate has been secretly mortgaged 3 times. You were already completely broke, Eleanor. I was the only person in this pathetic family who actually had the guts to do what was necessary to save your fake high society image." David stepped between the two angry women, holding his hands up defensively. "Please keep your voices down," David begged, looking around nervously as several paralegals and junior attorneys poked their heads out of their glass offices to watch the massive spectacle. "People are staring at us. We need to go home and figure out a new legal strategy immediately." "There is no new strategy, you absolute idiot!" Chloe screamed, slapping his hands away from her shoulders. "The federal bank flagged my social security number. Do you understand what that means? My personal accounts are going to be completely frozen by tomorrow morning. My trust fund will be heavily audited. Because of your stupid broke family, I am going to federal prison." Eleanor lunged forward with surprising speed and slapped Chloe squarely across the face. The loud, sharp cracking sound echoed through the entire hallway. Chloe stumbled backward, her hand flying up to her bright red cheek. "You ungrateful, vicious little snake!" Eleanor hissed, her chest heaving violently. "You dragged my innocent family into your illegal scheme. I will personally call the federal investigators myself and testify against you. I will tell them everything was your idea from the very beginning. I will make sure you rot in a federal cell for the rest of your miserable life." Chloe let out a feral scream and launched herself at the older woman. She grabbed Eleanor by her expensive pearl necklace and yanked hard. The heavy silk string snapped instantly, sending dozens of expensive white pearls scattering wildly across the carpeted floor. David shouted in panic, trying to pull his violent wife off his screaming mother. The two wealthy women clawed at each other, ripping expensive fabrics and screaming terrible, vicious insults that exposed every single dark secret their family had ever kept hidden. I stood perfectly still by the elevator, sipping my hot black coffee. I watched the elite women physically destroy each other in the middle of a prestigious corporate law firm. They were tearing down their own false empire from the inside out. I did not need to raise my voice or throw a single punch. Their own massive greed and blinding arrogance had done all the heavy lifting for me. The elevator doors finally chimed softly behind me and slid wide open. A team of large building security guards rushed past me, rushing down the hallway to separate the bleeding, screaming women. I stepped into the empty elevator, turned around, and offered them a final, highly satisfied smile before the metal doors smoothly closed, shutting them out of my life completely. I stepped into the empty elevator, turned around, and offered them a final, highly satisfied smile before the metal doors smoothly closed, shutting them out of my life completely. 2 days passed without a single word from my wealthy in-laws. I spent my time rebuilding my accounting firm and taking on new clients who actually respected my incredible talent. Then on Thursday night, my cell phone rang loudly across my quiet living room. I looked at the bright screen and saw Eleanor calling me. I almost ignored it, but my sharp intuition told me her massive ego had finally broken. I answered the phone and her loud, desperate sobbing immediately filled my ear. "Maya, you have to help us," Eleanor cried, her voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant country club tone. "Julian has been arrested, and they are going to transfer him to the maximum security county jail tonight." I took a slow sip of my hot tea, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the man who had completely abandoned me. "Why exactly are you calling me to fix your family problems?" "Eleanor," I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "Because all my bank accounts are completely frozen," she sobbed loudly. "The federal authorities locked my trust fund and my credit cards are entirely useless. I do not have the $2,000 in cash to post his bail. Please, Maya, he is sitting in a holding cell and he is completely terrified." I asked her what exactly he had done to get arrested. Eleanor admitted that Julian had completely run out of the $5,000 Chloe had given him. He was starving and desperate. He walked into a high-end grocery store and tried to steal food and basic hygiene supplies. The store security caught him immediately. When the local police ran his legal identification, they found outstanding federal warrants linked directly to his sudden disappearance and the massive bank fraud investigation. Chloe completely threw him under the bus. I told Eleanor I would meet her at the downtown police station in 20 minutes. I did not do this out of love or lingering loyalty for my cowardly husband. I did it because I suddenly realized Julian was the perfect pawn to deliver the final crushing blow to Chloe and David. I drove my black SUV through the dark city streets and arrived at the brightly lit police station. Eleanor was sitting on a hard wooden bench in the dirty waiting room, looking incredibly old and completely exhausted. She wore a stained, wrinkled sweater and had dark, heavy bags under her eyes. She looked nothing like the wealthy, elite woman who had mocked my background just a few days ago. I walked right past her without saying a single word and approached the heavy glass window at the front desk. I paid the $2,000 cash bail using my own money. The tired police officer stamped the release paperwork and told me to wait near the heavy steel doors. 10 minutes later, the thick doors buzzed loudly and swung open. Julian walked out looking absolutely terrible. He was wearing the same dirty clothes from the construction site and smelled like stale sweat and cheap jailhouse soap. He saw me standing there and immediately looked down at his ruined shoes in total shame. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking with dry emotion. "Thank you so much for paying my bail. I swear I will pay you back every single cent." I grabbed his dirty arm tightly and pulled him away from his crying mother. We walked into a small, empty consultation room near the vending machines. I closed the heavy wooden door behind us, ensuring total privacy. "I am not doing this because I care about you, Julian," I stated coldly, looking directly into his terrified eyes. "I am doing this because you are going to help me completely destroy Chloe and your brother. If you refuse my generous offer right now, I will immediately revoke your cash bail and let the federal officers drag you straight to prison for your active role in the bank fraud." Julian shook his head rapidly, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "I will do whatever you want, Maya," he promised desperately. "Just please do not let them send me back to that horrible cell." I reached into my deep coat pocket and pulled out a tiny black device. It was a high-tech micro-recorder commonly used by corporate investigators. It was no larger than a standard shirt button. I pressed the device firmly into his shaking hand. "You are going back to the luxury family estate tonight," I instructed him, my tone completely authoritative. "I know Chloe and David are currently locked inside the main study, frantically trying to hide their illegal paper trail before the federal agents inevitably raid the huge mansion. You are going to walk straight into that study and you are going to make Chloe talk. I want a clear recorded confession proving she orchestrated the entire $8 million fraud. I want her to admit she forged my specific signature." Julian looked down at the tiny recording device in his dirty palm. "But Chloe hates me right now," he stammered nervously. "She will immediately suspect something is wrong if I just start asking her highly specific questions about the stolen money." "Then you need to be smart and highly manipulative for the very first time in your entire life, Julian," I replied, crossing my arms. "Act incredibly desperate. Tell her the local police are heavily questioning you about the shell company. Tell her you are ready to completely confess everything to the federal investigators unless she gives you enough money to flee the country. Force her into a tight corner until she starts aggressively bragging about how easily she tricked the bank. She possesses a massive, arrogant ego. She will definitely not be able to resist explaining her brilliant criminal mastermind plan." Julian swallowed hard, nodding his head slowly as he finally understood the dangerous assignment. "And what happens to me after I get the recorded confession for you?" he asked quietly. "Once you hand me this recording device with her full confession, I will give you another $5,000 in untraceable cash," I promised smoothly. "I will let you completely disappear before the federal agents lock down the entire city. You can finally start your new cowardly life far away from me and your toxic family." Julian tightly gripped the micro-recorder, closing his fist around it. "Deal," he whispered. I opened the heavy door and walked him out to my large vehicle. I drove him across the dark city, stopping my car 2 blocks away from the massive family estate. The huge mansion was completely dark except for one single bright light shining from the second-floor study. I knew exactly what they were doing up there. They were desperately shredding every single physical document connecting them to the offshore accounts. I looked at Julian as he opened the passenger door. "Turn the device on right now and do not take it off until you are back in my car," I commanded sharply. "Do not fail me, Julian. Your entire freedom heavily depends on her absolute downfall tonight." He nodded once, stepping out into the cold night air, and began walking slowly toward the large iron gates of the estate, ready to face the absolute monster his family had created. He nodded once, stepping out into the cold night air, and began walking slowly toward the large iron gates of the estate, ready to face the absolute monster his family had created. The iron gates were slightly open. Julian slipped through the narrow gap, making no sound on the driveway. The grand estate looked quiet, but he knew exactly where to go. He quietly unlocked the heavy oak front door, using the spare key he kept hidden in his shoe for months. The grand foyer was completely dark and eerily silent. From the top of the sweeping marble staircase, he could hear the grinding noise of a heavy-duty paper shredder. He took a deep breath, feeling the tiny micro-recorder pressed tightly against his chest. He climbed the marble stairs, gripping the wooden railing to keep his hands from shaking. The door to his father's old mahogany study was wide open. The room was a disaster zone. Thick stacks of financial documents and legal files were scattered wildly across the expensive Persian rug. David was frantically feeding thick folders into a large industrial shredder, his face drenched in nervous sweat. Chloe was sitting behind the massive wooden desk, furiously typing on a laptop with a crazed look in her bright blue eyes. Julian stepped fully into the bright doorway. "Hello, David," he said quietly. David jumped violently, dropping a thick stack of papers onto the floor. He spun around, his eyes wide with absolute shock. "Julian?" he gasped, clutching his chest. "What are you doing here tonight?" Mother said you were locked in a maximum security holding cell downtown. How did you get out? Chloe immediately slammed her laptop shut and stood up. Her eyes narrowed into dangerous, suspicious slits. Who posted your cash bail, Julian? She demanded, her voice sharp and highly accusatory. Did you suddenly find a hidden bank account? Or did you make a dirty deal with the local police to save your own skin? Julian leaned heavily against the wooden doorframe, deliberately playing the part of a broken, desperate man pushed entirely to the brink. The police let me go on a temporary release. He lied smoothly, keeping his voice incredibly shaky and weak. They know absolutely everything, Chloe. The federal agents spent 3 hours interrogating me in a small, dark room. They have the loan documents. They know the shell company is tied to this specific house. I told them I would confess exactly how you did it if they gave me a plea deal, but I need money to run away tonight. Give me $50,000 in cash right now, or I am going straight back to the federal investigators tomorrow morning. Chloe let out a harsh, cruel laugh, walking slowly around the heavy wooden desk. She crossed her arms, staring at his dirty clothes with pure disgust. You are a terrible liar, Julian, she sneered coldly. You do not have the guts to talk to the federal authorities. You are just a pathetic coward begging for loose change because your brilliant wife finally threw you out like the garbage you are. Julian forced himself to step further into the bright room, fighting the intense urge to run away. I am not lying to you, Chloe, he insisted, raising his voice to sound genuinely angry. The federal agents literally laughed at the fake documents you created. They said the forgery on Maya's signature was incredibly sloppy. They said only a completely arrogant idiot would leave such an obvious paper trail leading directly back to this exact address. It was the perfect psychological trap. Chloe's massive, fragile ego instantly flared at the severe insult. Her face turned a violent shade of red. Sloppy, she hissed aggressively, taking another step toward him. That signature was an absolute masterpiece, you pathetic fool. The bank manager approved the $8 million transfer in less than 20 minutes. Do you really think they closely scrutinize the paperwork when someone who looks exactly like me walks into their lobby? Nobody questions a wealthy white woman at a bank, Julian. They served me premium coffee and happily processed the massive loan without asking a single hard question. They practically handed me the millions because my last name is Sterling, and I wore a custom designer suit. Do not you dare call my brilliant work sloppy. Julian swallowed hard, knowing the tiny device had just captured the golden confession. But he needed the rest of her vicious plan to completely destroy her. He looked over at his older brother who was staring at his wife. Then what happens when they finally come knocking on this front door tomorrow morning? Julian pressed, keeping the heavy pressure on her. The money is frozen. The toxic land is worthless. You cannot possibly fight the federal government, Chloe. We are all going down for this massive crime. Chloe smiled a sinister, selfish smile. She glanced at the closed laptop on the desk, then looked back at Julian. We are not going down for anything, she corrected him, her voice dripping with absolute malice. David and Eleanor might face the consequences, but I will be completely gone by sunrise. David dropped the papers. What are you talking about, Chloe? He asked, his voice trembling with sudden fear. Chloe rolled her eyes, looking at her husband like a disgusting insect. Did you really think I would stay here and go to prison for your pathetic family? She laughed cruelly. I just finished hacking into your mother's private retirement fund. She kept her secret emergency passwords written in a notebook in her bedroom. I am currently draining her final $2 million into an untraceable offshore crypto account. My private flight to Switzerland departs in exactly 4 hours. You and your horrible mother can rot in a federal cell forever. You were all just disposable pawns to me anyway. Julian felt a cold chill run down his spine. The absolute monster had finally revealed her true face. The absolute monster had finally revealed her true face. Julian stood completely still, absorbing the sheer magnitude of her betrayal. She was entirely willing to let her own husband and his elderly mother rot in a maximum security federal prison just so she could live a life of incredible luxury in Switzerland. David looked at his wife as if he was seeing a complete stranger. "You are stealing my mother retirement money," David whispered, his voice breaking with deep, painful realization. "You are abandoning us." Chloe simply shrugged her shoulders, showing absolutely zero remorse. "I am simply surviving, David," she replied coldly, picking up her heavy designer handbag. "You should have been much smarter." Julian knew he had absolutely everything he needed. The tiny micro-recorder pressed firmly against his chest had captured every single vicious word. He slowly began backing away toward the heavy wooden door of the study. "I need to leave right now," Julian said, his voice shaking slightly. "If the federal agents find me here, they will arrest all of us tonight." "Good luck in federal prison, Julian," Chloe mocked, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Try not to cry too loudly when they lock your cell door." Julian turned around and grabbed the brass door handle, but in his sudden rush to escape, his dirty jacket shifted awkwardly. The heavy rectangular battery pack connected to the tiny micro-recorder slipped completely out of his inside pocket and dangled visibly on a thin black wire. David caught the sudden movement out of the corner of his eye. He stared at the black wire hanging from his brother's jacket. "What exactly is that?" David demanded, his voice suddenly dropping into a dangerous dark tone. Julian froze completely, his heart hammering wildly against his ribs. "Nothing." Julian stammered quickly, trying to shove the heavy battery pack back into his coat pocket. "It is just my cheap cell phone charger." David lunged forward with incredible speed for a man his size. He grabbed Julian roughly by the shoulder and violently yanked the front of his dirty jacket open. The tiny black microphone was taped securely to his white shirt, blinking with a very small red light. "He is wearing a federal wire," David screamed in absolute panic. "He is secretly recording us right now." Chloe dropped her heavy designer handbag onto the wooden floor. Her pale face turned a highly terrifying shade of bright red. "Grab him!" she shrieked wildly, pointing a sharp manicured finger directly at Julian. "Do not let him leave this room with that recording." David tackled his younger brother, driving his shoulder hard into Julian's chest. The two grown men crashed violently onto the expensive Persian rug, knocking over a heavy antique side table. Thick financial documents and shredded papers flew wildly into the warm room air. Julian fought back with a sudden burst of pure, desperate adrenaline. He knew if they completely destroyed the tiny recording device, Maya would immediately revoke his cash bail and throw him straight back into the cold jail cell forever. He threw a hard punch, hitting David squarely in the jaw. David groaned in pain, temporarily loosening his tight grip. Julian scrambled desperately across the wooden floor, ripping the tiny microphone and the connected USB memory drive right off his torn shirt. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the small black drive tightly in his sweaty hand. Chloe was already rushing toward him, her eyes wide with total manic desperation. Julian did not run toward the heavy wooden door because David was already blocking the main exit. Instead, he ran directly toward the massive glass window overlooking the dark front driveway. He grabbed the heavy brass latch and threw the large window wide open. The freezing night air rushed instantly into the hot, chaotic study. He looked straight down at the dark driveway. I was standing there, leaning casually against the sleek hood of my black vehicle, waiting patiently for my ultimate prize. Maya. Julian screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing loudly across the massive, quiet estate. "Catch it right now!" He threw the small black USB drive straight out the open window, using every single ounce of strength he had left. The tiny black device sailed smoothly through the cold night air. I reached out and caught it perfectly in my right hand. I looked up at the bright second-floor window just as David violently tackled Julian from behind, dragging him forcefully away from the open frame. I smiled tightly, slipping the incredibly valuable recording right into my deep coat pocket. The trap was finally set, and the ultimate bait was completely secured. Suddenly, the heavy wooden front doors of the massive mansion violently burst open. Chloe ran out onto the grand stone porch, breathing heavily. She was not holding her designer handbag anymore. She was holding a heavy black handgun directly aimed at my chest. I did not flinch or scream. I stood perfectly still next to my vehicle, staring down the dark barrel of her expensive weapon. "You are legally trespassing on private property, Maya," she screamed, her voice echoing wildly into the dark night. "Give me that recording device right now, or I swear I will shoot you dead and claim highly justified self-defense." She clicked the safety off with a loud, sharp sound. I slowly walked around to the driver's side of my heavy vehicle, opening the strong metal door to shield my body. I looked at the highly desperate wealthy woman standing on her grand stone porch, completely unraveled and totally terrified. "You are not going to shoot me, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady, "because firing a loud weapon in this quiet neighborhood will very quickly bring the local police here tonight. And when they arrive, they will definitely find your shredded files. Run to Switzerland, Chloe. Run extremely fast, because the federal agents will be waiting." I drove quickly away into darkness. I drove quickly away into darkness. The heavy adrenaline was still pumping violently through my veins, but my mind remained incredibly sharp and completely focused. As soon as I reached the absolute safety of my downtown office, I plugged the small black USB drive into my highly secured computer terminal. I listened to the crystal-clear audio recording of Chloe eagerly confessing to massive federal bank fraud and her vicious plan to completely drain Eleanor retirement accounts. It was the ultimate smoking gun. I did not immediately call the local police. Local authorities could be easily bought or heavily influenced by the wealthy Sterling family connections. Instead, I packaged the audio file alongside my comprehensive forensic audit and sent it directly to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Then I made one final extremely important phone call to the current board of directors for the City Heritage Charity Foundation. I knew exactly where Chloe was going to be on Saturday night, and I was going to ensure her absolute downfall was as public and humiliating as possible. Exactly 48 hours later, the grand ballroom of the highly prestigious downtown Plaza Hotel was completely transformed into a spectacular vision of incredible wealth and high society glamour. It was the night of the annual City Heritage Charity Gala. This was the most exclusive, highly anticipated social event of the entire year for the city elite. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant, warm glow over dozens of perfectly arranged dining tables covered in imported silk tablecloths and towering floral centerpieces. A live classical orchestra played soft, elegant music in the background, while waiters in crisp white tuxedos carried silver trays of expensive champagne and rare caviar through the incredibly wealthy crowd. Every single important judge, powerful politician, and wealthy business tycoon in the entire state was currently standing in that massive room. And right in the very center of all this magnificent luxury stood Chloe. She made her grand entrance wearing an absolutely breathtaking custom-designed silver evening gown that easily cost $20,000. Diamonds sparkled brightly around her pale neck, and her blonde hair was styled in flawless, elegant waves. She looked exactly like the perfect, generous philanthropist she constantly pretended to be. Tonight was supposed to be her ultimate crowning achievement. In less than 2 hours, she was officially slated to be announced as the brand new president of the entire foundation. It was a highly powerful position that would permanently cement her elite status in the high society world. But more importantly, it would give her direct, unrestricted access to the massive charity endowment funds. As Chloe elegantly strutted across the polished marble floor, she felt completely invincible. In her highly arrogant mind, she had already won the massive war. She firmly believed she had successfully outsmarted everyone, including me. She had spent the last 2 days secretly transferring the stolen $2 million from Eleanor private retirement accounts into a highly untraceable offshore cryptocurrency wallet. She already had her luxury luggage completely packed and hidden in the trunk of her private limousine, currently waiting in the VIP hotel parking garage. Her first-class private flight to Geneva, Switzerland, was officially scheduled to depart exactly at midnight. She planned to smile for the expensive cameras, accept her prestigious charity award, and then quietly slip out the back doors before anyone even realized she was permanently gone. Chloe smiled brilliantly as the current foundation president, a wealthy older man named Richard, approached her with a warm, welcoming embrace. "You look absolutely stunning tonight, Chloe," Richard said, holding her hands affectionately. "The entire board is incredibly excited to officially pass the leadership torch to you later this evening. Your family has always been a massive pillar of incredible generosity in our beautiful city." Chloe let out a soft, perfectly practiced laugh, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you so much, Richard," she replied, her voice dripping with fake humility and toxic sweetness. "I am just incredibly honored to continue my family-long legacy of giving back to our wonderful community. Giving to those who are less fortunate is my absolute true passion in life." She turned smoothly away from him to greet a highly powerful state senator, completely ignoring the sharp buzzing of her cell phone hidden inside her small diamond clutch. It was David calling her for the 15th time that evening. Since her dramatic exit from the mansion, David and Eleanor had been locked inside the family estate, drowning in absolute panic. They had discovered the massive missing funds from the retirement accounts and finally realized Chloe had completely betrayed them. But Chloe did not care about their pathetic desperation anymore. She briefly opened her clutch, silenced the ringing phone, and took another sip of her expensive vintage champagne. They were nothing but dead weight to her now. She looked around the massive crowded ballroom, feeling an incredible rush of pure, arrogant superiority. She looked at the wealthy women dripping in expensive jewels and the powerful men smoking imported cigars. She believed she was infinitely smarter than every single person in that room. She believed she had successfully committed the perfect financial crime and was literally hours away from total, absolute freedom. She took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet scent of victory. She thought about my desperate face in the dark driveway 2 nights ago and smirked. I was probably hiding in my small apartment, trembling with fear, waiting for the federal bank investigators to violently kick my front door down. I was exactly where I truly belonged, completely destroyed and thoroughly defeated. A loud, beautiful chime rang softly through the massive overhead speakers, gently signaling the wealthy guests to finally take their assigned seats for the main presentation. Chloe confidently handed her empty crystal glass to a passing waiter. She smoothed the front of her stunning gown, preparing to confidently step up onto the grand illuminated stage to claim her prize. Then the massive double doors of the ballroom swung wide open. The loud sound of heavy brass hinges echoing across the room drew the attention of hundreds of wealthy guests. I stood perfectly framed in the grand entryway. I did not wear a cheap dress. I wore a breathtaking custom emerald silk gown cascading beautifully down to the marble floor. The rich color complemented my dark skin, making me look like undeniable royalty. My hair was elegantly pinned up, exposing my long neck and the incredibly expensive diamond necklace resting against my collarbone. I did not look like a defeated woman running from a federal bank fraud investigation. I looked exactly like a highly powerful executive who owned the entire building. The classical live orchestra stopped playing their soft music. A heavy, stunned silence washed over the massive ballroom. The wealthy crowd parted, forming a wide, clear path for me as I confidently walked forward. My designer heels clicked rhythmically against the expensive marble floor. Every eye in the room was locked directly on me. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression completely unreadable. I was a highly dangerous predator walking calmly into a massive cage full of terrified mice. Up near the front of the stage, Chloe completely froze. Her fake philanthropic smile instantly melted away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. Her pale hands began shaking so violently she nearly dropped her expensive diamond clutch onto the floor. She recognized me immediately. I was the absolute last person on earth she ever expected to see tonight. In her highly arrogant mind, I was supposed to be completely destroyed, removed from her perfect high society world forever. Seeing me standing there looking infinitely more powerful and elegant than she ever could completely shattered her fragile reality. Chloe's frantic eyes darted rapidly around the crowded room, realizing her wealthy friends were staring openly at the beautiful, confident black woman stealing her entire spotlight. Her deep, racist entitlement quickly overrode her initial overwhelming shock. She signaled aggressively to the head of hotel security, a large, muscular man wearing a dark, tailored suit and discreet earpiece. She marched quickly across the floor, desperate to intercept me before I could reach the center tables. "What are you doing here, Maya?" Chloe hissed viciously, keeping her voice low so the surrounding guests could not hear her panicked threats. "You are not on the guest list. You do not belong in this room or in this elite society. Turn around and walk out those doors right now before I have you violently thrown out into the dirty street." I did not stop walking. I simply slowed my pace, maintaining absolute control of the intense situation. "I belong exactly wherever I choose to be." "Chloe," I replied, my voice completely calm and smooth. "And tonight, I chose to attend the most important financial event of your entire life." The large security guard finally reached us, stepping firmly between me and the charity tables. "Excuse me, ma'am," the large man said, his voice deep and highly authoritative. "Mrs. Sterling has officially requested your immediate removal from this private charity gala tonight. I need to see your formal invitation right now, or I will have to physically escort you off the hotel premises immediately." Chloe crossed her thin arms over her expensive silver gown, a highly smug, triumphant smile returning quickly to her pale face. "Throw her out right now," Chloe ordered the large guard, pointing a sharp, manicured finger directly toward the open double doors. "She is a dangerous, unstable woman who is currently under active federal investigation. She is completely trying to ruin our beautiful, prestigious charity event." Several wealthy guests sitting at the nearby tables began whispering loudly, clearly shocked by the massive unfolding drama. They were watching eagerly, waiting to see the arrogant, elite white woman successfully humiliate me in front of the entire city. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or act aggressively. I simply reached into my small, elegant emerald clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy black card completely adorned with the official gold seal of the City Heritage Charity Foundation. I did not hand the card to the security guard. I held it up perfectly so Chloe could clearly see the bright gold lettering printed sharply across the front. "You are highly mistaken, Chloe," I stated, projecting my voice just enough so the surrounding tables could hear every single word perfectly. "I am not an uninvited guest tonight, and I am definitely not under any active federal investigation." I turned my sharp gaze directly to the large security guard. "My name is Maya. I am the lead senior forensic auditor formally hired by the Foundation Board of Directors exactly 24 hours ago. I was officially brought in to conduct an emergency comprehensive review of the entire charity financial endowment. I legally possess unrestricted executive access to this entire gala and every single financial document inside this building." The security guard looked closely at the highly exclusive gold-sealed credential securely resting in my hand. His strict, authoritative demeanor instantly completely vanished. He recognized the highest level of executive clearance the Foundation could possibly ever issue. He immediately took a large step back, quickly lowering his hands and nodding his head respectfully. "I deeply apologize for the confusion, Miss Maya," the guard said politely, stepping completely out of my way. "Please enjoy your evening." The smug, arrogant smile was wiped off her face, leaving only raw panic. "How did you get that credential?" Chloe stammered, her voice shaking. "You cannot audit this foundation. I am the new president. I make the final decisions here." I leaned in slightly so only she could hear my next words. "You are not president of anything, Chloe," I whispered coldly. "Your grand achievement is officially canceled tonight." I stepped past her completely frozen form and continued my confident walk across the expansive ballroom. I did not head toward the empty seats near the front of the stage. I walked straight past the grand tables toward the elevated audiovisual control booth, situated at the back corner of the massive room. Chloe was breathing heavily, but her massive ego refused to let her simply run away and hide. The orchestral music suddenly swelled, and a loud, booming voice echoed across the room, introducing her as the new president of the foundation. The wealthy crowd erupted into polite applause. Chloe forced a brilliant fake smile onto her pale face and elegantly glided up the carpeted stairs onto the brightly lit stage. She approached the clear acrylic podium, waving graciously to her wealthy friends and influential political connections. She looked exactly like a perfect angel, stepping up to accept her rightful crown. I reached the steps of the dark AV booth and pulled open the heavy soundproof door. Two young tech technicians wearing black headsets looked up at me in total surprise. "This is a highly restricted area, ma'am," one of them said, quickly moving to block my path. I held up my heavy gold-sealed credential. "Board-mandated executive audit," I stated firmly, keeping my voice low and authoritative. "Give me total access to the main projection console right now." The technicians saw the highest level clearance and immediately backed away, leaving the glowing control board completely to me. I reached into my small emerald clutch and pulled out the black USB drive containing my entire forensic financial audit. Down on the main stage, Chloe was currently leaning into the silver microphone. "Thank you all so incredibly much," she began, her voice perfectly modulated to sound deeply emotional. "It is such a massive honor to stand before you tonight. My amazing family has always believed in the absolute power of giving back to our wonderful community. We believe in strong family values and protecting the most vulnerable people in our beautiful city." She actually managed to squeeze out a single fake tear, delicately wiping it away from her cheek. The wealthy audience let out a collective sigh of admiration, completely captivated by her incredible performance. She looked directly at the invisible glass teleprompter, reading her carefully written script about honesty, integrity, and building a better future for the underprivileged children. I plugged my black drive directly into the main terminal. I quickly navigated through the complex sound and lighting interface, easily locating the specific feed for the stage teleprompter. Chloe was right in the middle of a highly dramatic sentence about personal sacrifice. "Giving is not just about writing a check," she said passionately to the quiet room. "It is about committing your entire heart and soul to ensuring that every single dollar goes exactly where it is needed the most to help those who cannot help themselves." I reached forward and firmly pressed the kill switch for the teleprompter feed. Down on the stage, the scrolling text on the clear glass screens instantly vanished, leaving empty blank space. Chloe completely froze mid-sentence. Her mouth hung open slightly as she stared at the empty glass. She tapped her manicured fingernails nervously on the side of the podium, waiting for the text to magically reappear. But it remained totally blank. The heavy silence in the massive ballroom slowly stretched on, becoming incredibly awkward. She let out a highly nervous laugh, trying desperately to recover her composure. As I was saying, she stammered, her confident voice suddenly shaking violently. "Giving is very important to my family. We give so much to the poor. We really care about the poor people." It was an absolutely pathetic ad-lib. The powerful politicians and wealthy business leaders in the front row exchanged highly confused glances. The perfect polished illusion was rapidly cracking right before their eyes. I was not going to let her embarrass herself with a terrible speech. I was going to expose her massive criminal empire to the entire world. I opened the main presentation software and bypassed the standard charity logo loop. I dragged my forensic accounting software interface directly onto the main live projection feed. I pressed the bright green execute button. Behind Chloe, the three massive LED screens spanning the entire width of the grand stage violently flickered. The beautiful gold foundation logo completely vanished into total darkness. A collective loud gasp echoed violently across the massive ballroom as the screens suddenly lit up again. They were no longer showing pictures of happy children or charity events. Instead, the giant screens were completely filled with my highly complex forensic financial software interface. Massive red warning labels flashed brightly across the screens. Huge, highly detailed graphs and complex flowcharts illuminated the dark room, casting a harsh red glow directly onto Chloe's shocked face. The interface clearly displayed exact bank routing numbers, massive cash transfers, and highly suspicious offshore corporate accounts. I maximized the main money trail window, ensuring the bold text was large enough for every single person in the back row to read perfectly. The crowd began murmuring loudly as they easily recognized their own massive charity donations listed clearly on the giant screens. But instead of flowing into the legitimate foundation accounts, the bright red lines on the chart showed their millions of dollars being instantly diverted directly into a secret shell company. And right at the very top of the massive chart, printed in huge, bold letters, was the legal registered name of the sole beneficiary for that illegal offshore account, Chloe Sterling. People stood up from their expensive dinner tables, outraged by the visual evidence displayed right in front of them. The absolute reality of her financial deception was exposed for everyone to witness, destroying her entire fake high society reputation forever. She could not hide behind her expensive gowns because the hard financial data fully exposed her malicious criminal nature to the entire shocked city. I stepped out of the dark AV booth and walked slowly back into the massive ballroom, holding a wireless microphone securely in my hand. The absolute chaos in the room was palpable. Hundreds of wealthy guests were pointing at the giant illuminated screens, whispering frantically to each other. On the stage, Chloe looked exactly like a trapped animal. She was frantically hitting the buttons on the clear acrylic podium, desperately trying to turn off the massive projection behind her, but the system was completely locked under my executive override. I raised the microphone to my lips. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice echoed powerfully through the massive ballroom, cutting instantly through the loud, chaotic murmurs. I did not scream or shout. My tone was deadly calm, highly authoritative, and completely unwavering. Please direct your undivided attention to the large screens behind your newly announced president. The entire room fell into a dead, heavy silence. Every single face turned toward me, then back to the glowing financial charts. "My name is Maya." I continued walking slowly down the center aisle of the ballroom so everyone could see me clearly. "I am a senior forensic accountant. 24 hours ago, I was completely authorized by the Foundation Board of Directors to conduct a highly classified emergency audit of the City Heritage Charity Endowment funds. What you are looking at right now is the undeniable live data of exactly where your generous charitable donations have been going for the past 3 entire years." I clicked a small remote in my hand, and the massive screen zoomed in on a specific red highlighted transaction block. "Let us start with the highly publicized Children's Hospital Wing initiative from last spring," I stated, my voice echoing like thunder. "This foundation proudly raised over $500,000 from the generous people sitting in this very room tonight." I pointed up at the massive bright screen. "As you can clearly see right here, the heavy green line representing your generous hospital donations does not travel to any medical facility. Instead, the funds were immediately transferred through 3 separate dummy corporations hidden in the Cayman Islands. From there, the money was directly deposited into a highly private offshore wealth management account." I clicked the remote again. A new window popped up on the giant screen displaying official bank records and signed purchase receipts. "And the sole registered owner of that private offshore account is standing right in front of you on that stage tonight. That specific hospital donation money was entirely used to purchase Mrs. Chloe Sterling brand new luxury sports car and her extensive collection of $20,000 designer gowns, including the beautiful silver dress she is currently wearing right now." A loud collective gasp of pure horror erupted from the wealthy crowd. A prominent female philanthropist sitting in the front row actually covered her mouth in absolute shock, staring at Chloe with pure disgust. Chloe gripped the edges of the clear podium so hard her knuckles turned completely white. "That is a massive lie!" she screamed, her voice cracking with wild manic panic. This woman is a highly dangerous criminal hacking our secure systems. She is completely manipulating the digital data to intentionally frame me. Turn those screens off right now. I completely ignored her pathetic, desperate screaming and clicked my remote a third time. The giant screen shifted to a completely new complex financial flowchart. But the massive theft does not stop there. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, walking closer to the grand illuminated stage. Let us look very closely at the prestigious Inner-City Scholarship Fund you all generously supported last winter. Senator Thomas, I said, looking directly at a highly influential older man sitting near the center aisle. You personally wrote a check for $250,000 to help underprivileged youth attend college. The powerful senator stood up, his face turning bright red with intense anger as he stared at the massive screen. Look at the bright yellow line attached to your specific donation, Senator, I instructed calmly. The screen zoomed in perfectly, tracking the exact routing numbers of his personal paper check. Your generous $250,000 was deposited into the Charity General Fund at 9 in the morning. By noon, that exact same amount was electronically wired directly to a highly illegal high-stakes online gambling syndicate based in Macau. The massive screen flashed loudly, displaying the digital betting logs and the registered username associated with the massive gambling losses. The secret account belongs entirely to David Sterling Chloe, highly responsible husband. Your precious scholarship money was used to completely pay off his massive illegal gambling debts so the loan sharks would not aggressively break his legs. The senator slammed his expensive silk napkin down on his dinner table, pointing a furious, shaking finger directly at Chloe. "You absolute monster!" he yelled, his loud voice carrying across the entire grand ballroom. "You stole money from innocent, helpless children." The entire wealthy crowd completely turned against her in a matter of seconds. Angry shouts and loud demands for immediate justice filled the grand ballroom. The people in this room were not used to being scammed or made to look like complete fools. Their inherited wealth and high social status usually protected them from cheap common con artists. But they had just been brutally robbed by one of their own elite members. Chloe was physically shaking, backing away from the clear podium as the wealthy crowd aggressively shouted terrible insults at her. "The Sterling family is entirely broke," I announced, my voice rising just enough to be clearly heard over the massive, angry crowd. "They have secretly mortgaged their massive luxury estate 3 times. 2 days ago, Chloe forged federal banking documents to secure an illegal $8 million commercial loan under my name, using this exact charity foundation as hidden collateral. When I legally froze that stolen money, she completely panicked and decided to drain the foundation dry tonight, before fleeing the country." I clicked the remote one final time. The massive screens displayed the exact flight itinerary for a private luxury jet scheduled to leave for Geneva, Switzerland, at exactly midnight tonight, booked exclusively under Chloe maiden name. "You did not come here tonight to graciously accept a charity presidency, Chloe," I said, walking right up to the very edge of the grand stage, looking directly up into her terrified, panicked blue eyes. "You came here tonight to violently rob your wealthy friends blind one last time and completely abandon your own family to take the massive federal fall. You are nothing but a cheap, greedy thief hiding behind expensive diamonds and a fake high society smile." The absolute truth was completely laid bare for the entire city to see. Every single illegal transaction, every single stolen dollar, every single malicious lie was permanently burned onto those massive digital screens. The wealthy elite donors who had once eagerly clapped for her and heavily praised her supposed generosity were now openly demanding her immediate federal arrest. Several board members were already frantically dialing their personal corporate attorneys and federal contacts on their cell phones. Chloe looked completely trapped. She darted her panicked eyes toward the side exits of the grand ballroom, desperately searching for any possible escape route. She took a quick step backward, her expensive designer heel catching on the thick stage carpet. She stumbled awkwardly, nearly falling down in front of the furious, screaming audience. There were no more fake smiles, no more racial microaggressions, and absolutely no more arrogant hiding behind her wealthy white privilege. She was completely exposed, stripped of her elite power, and left entirely defenseless in front of the exact people she had so ruthlessly manipulated. The heavy silence that had initially filled the room was now completely replaced by a deafening roar of absolute high society outrage. And I just stood there calmly watching her entire fake empire burn directly to the ground. "Cut the power," Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking into a shriek that echoed over the angry crowd. "Turn off those screens right now!" She spun wildly, pointing a shaking hand toward the darkened audio-visual booth where I had locked the system. When the giant screens behind her remained brightly illuminated, displaying her financial crimes, she completely snapped. She grabbed a crystal champagne flute from the acrylic podium and hurled it directly at my face with all the force she could muster. I did not duck or flinch. The heavy glass sailed through the air and smashed violently against the polished edge of the stage next to my designer heels. It shattered into 100 tiny pieces, showering the floor around me with expensive alcohol and broken glass. I looked down at the shattered pieces and then back up at her. "You are completely out of options, Chloe," I said, my voice projecting clearly through my wireless microphone. "You cannot bully your way out of financial fraud, and you cannot throw a temper tantrum to make the truth disappear." The wealthy guests standing in the front rows instinctively stepped backward, moving away from the stage to distance themselves from her violent outburst. The state senator, who had just realized his scholarship donation was gone, pulled his wife away, looking at Chloe with absolute disgust. The glittering ballroom had instantly turned into a hostile prison for her. "Someone call hotel security right now," Chloe pleaded desperately, looking at the wealthy faces she used to command so effortlessly. "Tell the building manager to cut the main electrical breaker. Please, you have to believe me. This is a massive misunderstanding." Nobody moved to help her. The elite charity board members simply glared at her, their arms crossed tightly in judgment. Richard, the older foundation president, who had warmly embraced her just 20 minutes earlier, now looked at her as if she were a dangerous criminal. "We are not cutting the power," Chloe Richards stated firmly, his voice shaking with intense betrayal. "We are going to leave those screens on until the proper authorities arrive." Chloe realized nobody was going to save her. She hiked up the heavy silver fabric of her $20,000 designer gown and prepared to make a desperate run for the rear service exit located behind the massive stage curtains. She thought she could still reach her waiting private limousine in the underground parking garage. But just as she took her first panicked step toward the dark curtains, the massive double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom violently swung open. The loud, heavy thud of the thick wooden doors hitting the marble walls immediately silenced the angry shouting of the wealthy crowd. A team of 12 federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers, with large yellow letters printed across their backs, marched aggressively into the brightly lit room. They moved with absolute precision and undeniable authority, completely ignoring the lavish decorations and the highly wealthy status of the people standing in their way. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, clear path straight down the center aisle. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with graying hair and a highly serious expression, walked directly toward the illuminated stage. He held a thick stack of official legal documents tightly in his strong hand. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with sheer terror as she watched the federal agents march down the center aisle. Her breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. She looked like a ghost standing under the bright stage lights. The lead agent reached the bottom of the stage steps and looked directly up at her. "Chloe Sterling," he announced, his deep, authoritative voice carrying effortlessly across the quiet ballroom without needing a microphone. "We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We hold a highly classified federal warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud." Chloe shook her head rapidly, her perfect blonde hair falling completely out of its elegant styling. "You cannot arrest me here," she stammered, her voice barely a weak whisper. "I am a highly respected member of this community. I demand to call my private corporate attorney right now." The lead agent did not smile or show any sympathy for her pathetic display of elite privilege. Your corporate attorney has already been fully notified of these severe federal charges, ma'am, the agent replied coldly, stepping up onto the grand stage. And considering the extremely comprehensive audio confession we recently received, detailing your exact plans to illegally drain your mother-in-law retirement funds and flee to Switzerland, your lawyer strongly advised us to consider you an extreme flight risk tonight. Chloe turned her terrified eyes toward me. The realization finally crashed down upon her, completely shattering her massive, arrogant ego. She finally understood exactly what Julian had done. The tiny recording device, the violent struggle in the dark study, and my calm smile in the driveway all made perfect, terrifying sense to her now. You sent Julian wearing a federal wire, she whispered, staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You set me up, Maya. I simply smiled, turning off my wireless microphone. I did not set you up, Chloe, I replied, keeping my voice low so only she heard. Two federal agents stepped forward and firmly grabbed Chloe by her arms. They spun her around, forcing her hands behind her back. The loud, sharp clicking sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around her pale wrists echoed perfectly across the quiet ballroom. The massive crowd of wealthy elite guests watched in absolute stunned silence as the former queen of their high society was violently reduced to a common federal criminal. The expensive silver gown she wore now looked completely ridiculous against the harsh reality of her immediate arrest. Her grand escape plan was entirely ruined forever by my audit. Her grand escape plan was entirely ruined forever by my audit. Chloe refused to accept defeat with dignity. Pure adrenaline ripped through her. She jerked her arm forward, slipping her wrist out of the agent grip before the cuff could lock. I will absolutely not go to a federal prison, she screamed. She shoved the agent backward and hiked up her heavy silver gown. She abandoned all elite decorum, sprinting desperately across the marble floor toward the rear service exit. She looked completely ridiculous running for her life. But she completely forgot she was wearing 4-inch designer stiletto heels. She made it exactly 10 feet before disaster struck. Her thin heel caught sharply on the brass floor divider. A loud snap echoed through the silent ballroom as the heel broke in half. Chloe shrieked loudly in pain as her left ankle violently twisted. She lost her balance entirely, pitching sharply forward. She quickly threw her arms out to brace herself, but the heavy silk fabric tightly tangled around her long legs. She landed face first onto the hard marble floor, with a sickening thud ruining her stunning dress. A loud gasp rippled through the wealthy crowd as they watched their former high society queen face-plant directly in front of them. Several elite guests stepped backward deliberately, moving their expensive shoes out of the way so they would not get touched by her. Chloe laid flat on the hard floor, gasping for cold air. Her nose was bleeding slightly, and her perfect expensive makeup was smeared across her pale, sweaty face. She looked up at the wealthy crowd with wide, terrified eyes, begging for someone to help her stand up. But nobody moved a single inch. Several younger guests pulled out their cell phones and began openly recording her humiliating downfall. The federal agents did not hesitate. Two large men descended upon her, grabbing her bare arms and hauling her roughly to her feet. Chloe sobbed loudly, her chest heaving, as she finally realized her wealthy privilege could not protect her anymore. Stop crying and place your hands behind your back, the lead federal agent ordered, his voice totally devoid of any basic human sympathy. He forcefully pulled her arms backward. The loud, sharp clicking sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around both of her wrists echoed perfectly across the grand ballroom. The sound represented the absolute end of her vicious criminal reign. You have the right to remain silent, the agent stated loudly, pushing her toward the main exit. While Chloe was being dragged away, the massive chaos shifted to the back of the grand ballroom. David had been standing near the main lobby doors, watching his wife get violently arrested. Instead of running forward to help his screaming wife, David slowly turned around, and tried to quietly slip out into the dark hotel hallway. He kept his head down, trying to blend in with the shocked crowd, but the federal agents had fully secured the entire building. "David Sterling, stop right there," an agent yelled, pointing a heavy flashlight directly at his face. David completely panicked. He pushed past a wealthy older woman and broke into a fast, clumsy sprint toward the glass revolving doors. He did not make it very far. Two highly trained federal agents charged forward and violently tackled him right next to the grand ice sculpture. The three men crashed heavily onto the marble floor. David immediately started crying loudly, sobbing like a terrified child as the agents firmly pressed his face into the cold stone. "I did not do anything," he shrieked desperately, his voice cracking in pure cowardice. "It was all my wife. Chloe forged the documents. She stole the charity money. Please do not arrest me." His wealthy country club friends watched in absolute horror as the arrogant man threw his own wife under the bus to save his own skin. The agents cuffed his wrists and yanked him up by his suit collar. Over at the main VIP table, Eleanor was watching her entire family legacy completely burn to ashes right before her eyes. Her generational wealth was gone. Her beautiful luxury estate was being actively foreclosed upon by the federal bank. Her favorite son was crying in steel handcuffs, and her arrogant daughter-in-law was being dragged out by federal agents. Eleanor clutched her expensive pearl necklace, desperately seeking a single friendly face. But her elite friends turned their backs on her, actively ignoring her terrified gaze. Eleanor let out a dramatic, loud wail, placing the back of her hand against her forehead. The massive stress was simply too much for her fragile, elitist ego to handle. Her eyes rolled back into her head and her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed backward, fainting directly into a massive table covered with expensive seafood appetizers. She landed heavily on top of a giant silver platter of cocktail shrimp, sending white crushed ice and red expensive cocktail sauce flying wildly through the cold air. The heavy table buckled, leaving her slumped awkwardly over the ruined food. She expected someone to immediately rush to her side and fan her face, but nobody rushed forward to help her up. The wealthy guests actively stepped away, avoiding the embarrassing spectacle. I stood perfectly tall on the grand illuminated stage, holding the microphone loosely at my side. I looked down at the complete and utter destruction of the powerful Sterling family. They had tried to destroy my life because they thought my background made me weak and easily disposable. They thought they could use my spotless federal reputation as a cheap shield for their massive greed. I took a deep breath of the cool air circulating through the grand ballroom. The heavy screens behind me continued to softly glow, displaying the absolute truth. I had not simply defeated my highly arrogant enemies tonight. I had completely obliterated their entire fake empire, and I had done it without breaking a single law. I had completely obliterated their entire fake empire, and I had done it without breaking a single law. Exactly 3 weeks passed since that highly unforgettable night at the charity gala. The severe fallout from Chloe's massive public arrest was incredibly swift and absolutely devastating for the entire Sterling family. The local news stations and major financial blogs ran front-page stories exposing their massive web of deceit and their highly illegal offshore accounts. The elite high society network that had heavily shielded them for decades instantly completely vanished. They were permanently excommunicated from their prestigious country clubs, and their wealthy friends refused to even answer their desperate phone calls. I took a rare morning off from my busy accounting firm to witness the absolute final chapter of their financial ruin. I parked my black vehicle across the street from the massive county courthouse and walked up the wide concrete steps. Today was the official bank foreclosure auction for the grand Sterling family estate. I walked into the crowded auction hall and stood quietly in the back row. The room was filled with wealthy real estate developers and aggressive property investors eager to buy the massive luxury mansion at a steep discount. I did not raise a bidding paddle. I simply stood there with my arms crossed, watching the highly energetic auctioneer stand behind his tall wooden podium. He rapidly called out the rising numbers, completely stripping away the rich legacy the arrogant family had always bragged about. The massive estate with its sprawling green lawns and heated swimming pools was no longer a symbol of elite white privilege. It was just another distressed bank asset being sold off to the absolute highest bidder. Going once, the auctioneer shouted, pointing his wooden gavel at a wealthy developer in the front row. Going twice, sold for $4.2 million. The sharp crack of the wooden gavel hitting the heavy block echoed loudly across the large room. That single loud sound officially ended 4 entire generations of inherited wealth. They had absolutely nothing left to their name. While the wealthy investors signed their official property deeds, I walked back outside into the bright morning sunlight. I thought about Eleanor and her massive, arrogant ego. The federal bank had officially seized all her remaining financial assets to help cover the massive toxic land cleanup fees and the stolen charity funds. She was forcefully evicted from her beautiful grand estate just 2 days ago. I knew exactly where she was currently living, because my firm was still officially assisting the federal investigators with the massive asset recovery process. Eleanor was forced to move into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment in a highly run-down, low-income neighborhood on the far east side of the city. It was the exact type of neighborhood she used to aggressively mock and openly look down upon whenever we attended her lavish family dinners. There were no more expensive silk tablecloths or imported crystal champagne flutes for her to enjoy. She had to pack her few remaining personal belongings into cheap cardboard boxes all by herself. Her prestigious country club friends had completely abandoned her, refusing to associate their clean names with a notorious federal criminal family. She was entirely alone, trapped inside a tiny, damp apartment, completely consumed by her own bitter regret. She finally had to experience the harsh, unforgiving reality of living in the exact poverty she used to constantly laugh at. But Eleanor's highly pathetic living situation was an absolute luxury compared to the dark nightmare Chloe was currently facing. Chloe was officially denied bail by the federal judge during her initial arraignment hearing. The judge had listened carefully to the crystal-clear audio recording Julian had secretly captured in the dark study. Hearing her openly brag about illegally bypassing bank security protocols and violently plotting to drain her own mother-in-law retirement fund completely destroyed any chance of leniency. The strict federal judge publicly labeled her an extreme flight risk and an incredibly dangerous financial predator who showed absolutely zero remorse for her actions. Chloe was currently sitting inside a highly secure federal holding cell, wearing a cheap, bright orange prison jumpsuit instead of her $20,000 silver designer gowns. The federal prosecutors had officially charged her with massive wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe federal tax evasion. Her highly expensive corporate lawyers had completely abandoned her because she simply had no money left to pay their massive legal retainers. She was assigned an overworked public defender who strongly advised her to immediately plead guilty to avoid spending the rest of her natural life behind bars. She was currently facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 entire years in a maximum security federal penitentiary far away from her elite lifestyle. I walked down the concrete courthouse steps, feeling an incredibly deep sense of absolute peace. I did not feel any guilt or remorse for what had happened to them. They had aggressively dug their own deep graves the very moment they decided to illegally forge my signature and use my spotless federal reputation as a cheap shield for their massive greed. They severely underestimated my high intelligence and my relentless drive. They truly believed I would just quietly accept my terrible fate and go to federal prison for their massive crimes just because I did not come from their elite, wealthy background. But they completely forgot that I make my living meticulously tracking down hidden truths and exposing complex financial lies. They thought they could easily manipulate the federal banking system, but I am the person who physically audits the entire system. I opened the heavy door of my sleek black SUV and climbed into the comfortable leather driver's seat, looking forward to my bright future. I opened the heavy door of my sleek black SUV and climbed into the comfortable leather driver's seat, looking forward to my bright future. I pulled away from the busy courthouse and merged onto the crowded downtown highway. By the time I reached the financial district, a massive dark storm system had quickly rolled over the city. Thick gray clouds completely blocked out the warm morning sun, and heavy sheets of freezing rain began aggressively pounding against my windshield. I turned on my windshield wipers, listening to the rhythmic sound as I navigated through the flooded downtown streets. I was heading directly to my accounting firm, eager to finally close this dark chapter and fully dedicate my time to my rapidly expanding business. I turned my large vehicle onto the quiet private street, located directly behind my corporate office building. I pressed the button to open the heavy steel gates leading down into my secure underground parking garage. But as my headlights swept across the dark, wet pavement, I saw a lone figure standing perfectly still in the freezing downpour. He was completely soaked to the bone, shivering violently in the harsh wind. It was Julian. He was no longer wearing the dirty construction clothes, but the cheap suit he had clearly bought with the cash I gave him looked absolutely pathetic, stuck to his wet skin. He saw my sleek black SUV approaching and immediately stepped out right into the middle of the dark driveway, physically blocking my path to the garage. I hit the brakes, bringing my heavy vehicle to a complete stop, just a few feet away from his wet shoes. I did not unlock my doors or invite him inside out of the freezing storm. I simply pressed the button and slowly rolled down my tinted driver's side window, letting the cold, wet air blow into my warm, pristine car. Julian rushed forward, placing his freezing wet hands eagerly on the edge of my open window. His hair was plastered flat against his forehead, and thick drops of cold rain were running down his pale cheeks, hiding the desperate tears forming in his eyes. "Maya," he cried out, his voice completely cracking over the loud sound of the aggressive thunderstorm. "Thank God you are finally here. I have been standing out in this freezing rain for 3 entire hours waiting for you." "I watched the live news broadcast this morning, Maya. I saw the massive bank auction. My family has absolutely nothing left. Chloe is rotting in a federal prison cell, and my mother is living in total poverty. It is finally over for them." I kept both of my hands firmly resting on the leather steering wheel, staring completely blankly at his highly pathetic face. "Yes, Julian," I replied, my voice completely flat and emotionless. "Their massive criminal empire is permanently destroyed. You have your $5,000 in untraceable cash and your total legal freedom. I upheld my end of our strict business arrangement perfectly. Now step away from my vehicle so I can safely go to work." Julian did not step back. Instead, his grip on my wet window tightened desperately. He fell hard onto his knees, splashing dirty rainwater all over his cheap suit pants. "Please, Maya," he begged, sobbing loudly into the freezing wind. "Do not push me away like this. We are still legally married. I did absolutely everything you asked me to do. I walked right back into that highly dangerous house. I wore the federal wire for you. I physically fought my own brother and completely risked my entire freedom to get you that audio confession. I helped you take down Chloe and perfectly expose their massive crimes to the entire city. I proved my total loyalty to you, Maya. Please, just let me come back home. Give me one more chance to be the loyal, wealthy husband you truly deserve." I looked down at the weak, cowardly man kneeling in the dirty puddle. He actually believed his pathetic lies. He genuinely thought participating in the absolute destruction of his highly toxic family somehow made him a brave hero, worthy of my hard-earned wealth. He wanted to instantly slip right back into a luxurious, comfortable life, funded entirely by my massive success. I slowly reached over to my empty passenger seat and picked up a thick manila envelope. I pulled out the crisp white legal documents hidden inside. They were the exact same divorce papers he had cowardly left on our pristine kitchen island exactly 6 months ago, when he completely abandoned me to face federal prison alone. I held the dry, crisp papers out the window, letting the heavy rain hit the edges. "You did not do a single thing for me, Julian," I stated, my voice colder and far more unforgiving than the violent storm raging around us. "You wore that federal wire because you were absolutely terrified of going to a maximum security prison for bank fraud. You betrayed your toxic family the exact same way you completely betrayed me. You have absolutely no loyalty to anyone but yourself. You are exactly like Chloe and your mother. You just lack their aggressive ambition. Julian stared down at the divorce papers, his jaw dropping open in pure shock. He saw my bold, elegant signature perfectly countersigned right next to his sloppy handwriting. The legal separation was entirely final. But I love you, Julian stammered weakly, fresh tears streaming rapidly down his wet face. I cannot survive out here completely on my own, Maya. I have absolutely no money and no family left. What am I supposed to do now? That is completely your problem to solve, Julian, I replied, dropping the finalized divorce papers directly into his wet, shaking hands. You did not do it for me. You did it to save yourself. We are completely done. I did not wait for his pathetic response. I pressed the button and smoothly rolled up the tinted window, completely shutting out his loud, desperate crying and the aggressive sound of the pouring rain. I pressed my foot firmly onto the gas pedal. Julian stumbled backward out of the way, clutching the wet divorce papers to his chest as my heavy vehicle drove smoothly past him. I drove down the concrete ramp into my brightly lit, secure parking garage, completely leaving him behind in the cold, dark storm. He was entirely erased from my present, and he would absolutely never exist in my future. He was entirely erased from my present, and he would absolutely never exist in my future. Fast forward exactly 18 months since that dark, stormy morning in the underground parking garage. The heavy, dark clouds of that highly stressful period have completely vanished from my life, forever. I am currently standing in my spectacular brand new corner office, located on the 50th floor of the most prestigious commercial skyscraper in the entire downtown financial district. The bright, warm morning sun is shining beautifully, streaming directly through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that wrap completely around my expansive suite. The sweeping view of the vibrant city skyline is absolutely breathtaking, but the incredible business I have successfully built inside these glass walls is infinitely more impressive. My forensic accounting firm is no longer just a small, independent operation fighting for basic industry recognition. We are now officially the largest and most highly respected Black-owned forensic auditing agency in the entire state. After the highly publicized Charity Gala scandal and the massive federal arrests of the Sterling family, my professional reputation skyrocketed practically overnight. The major corporate clients who had previously canceled their lucrative contracts based on Chloe vicious country club rumors desperately called my receptionist begging to hire us back. I did not accept their panicked apologies right away. I made their wealthy chief financial officers sit patiently in my waiting room for hours before finally agreeing to sign brand new corporate contracts at exactly double my original auditing rate. They happily paid every single cent without any argument because they finally understood my absolute undeniable value. My brilliant corporate team has completely tripled in size over the last year. I intentionally hired sharp, highly talented young accountants who grew up in the exact same working-class neighborhoods I did. I actively gave them the incredible high-paying opportunities that the elitist corporate world usually reserves only for people with massive trust funds and legacy family connections. Walking through my busy firm and seeing these brilliant young professionals thriving heavily in a highly supportive environment brings me an incredible amount of daily joy. We currently handle massive international fraud investigations and complex corporate embezzlement cases for the absolute largest financial institutions in the entire country. I built a highly secure, impenetrable fortress of massive success that absolutely nobody can ever take away from me. Sometimes, I take a brief, quiet moment to look down at the bustling, tiny city streets far below my large window and think about the highly arrogant family that actively tried to completely destroy my life. I do not think about them with any lingering anger or deep personal bitterness anymore. I simply view them as a highly complex mathematical equation that I successfully solved and permanently archived away. Chloe was officially sentenced to 24 entire years in a maximum security federal prison, without any possibility of early parole. Her massive, fragile ego was completely crushed under the heavy, unforgiving weight of absolute federal justice. Eleanor is still living miserably in that tiny, cramped, low-income apartment, completely forgotten by the wealthy high society friends she valued significantly more than basic human decency. And Julian simply faded away into the absolute total obscurity he always truly deserved, completely cut off from the massive generational wealth he lacked the basic courage to earn for himself. They built their entire prestigious family legacy on a highly fragile foundation of ugly lies, massive greed, and intense racial entitlement. When I finally pulled the heavy curtain back, their entire fake empire crumbled into useless dust in a matter of mere seconds. I slowly walked over to my large custom mahogany desk and gently touched the smooth, polished surface. I did not inherit this massive, incredible success. I did not rely on a wealthy father or a heavily funded trust account to easily buy my way into these highly elite corporate rooms. I built this incredible financial empire, brick by brick, using my own sharp intellect, my relentless work ethic, and my absolute unwavering dedication to finding the total truth. The high society elite heavily tried to use my working class background as a sharp weapon against me. They mistakenly thought that because I did not grow up attending expensive private schools or highly exclusive country clubs, I would be completely weak and easily manipulated. They fundamentally misunderstood the incredible immense strength it actually takes to survive and heavily thrive when the entire financial system is specifically built to keep you permanently locked out. That incredible unyielding strength ultimately became my absolute strongest armor. I actively used their blinding arrogance and their deep-rooted prejudice as the exact precise tools to brilliantly orchestrate their spectacular public downfall. They literally handed me the exact detailed blueprint for their total destruction, because they never once stopped to heavily consider that the quiet accountant they treated like absolute garbage was actually the smartest and most highly dangerous person in the entire room. I take a deep, slow breath of the crisp, cool air constantly circulating through my beautiful corner office. I look out over the sweeping, majestic city skyline, feeling absolutely perfectly at peace with the highly powerful, independent woman I have fully become. I am completely, totally free from their highly toxic manipulation and their heavy, suffocating family expectations. I am the sole powerful author of my own incredible destiny, and my future has never looked brighter than it does right now. I turn slowly away from the massive glass window and smile warmly, looking directly into the camera to deliver my final message to all of you who followed this incredible journey. They thought because I didn't come from their world, I wouldn't know how to survive in it. But they forgot one thing. I make a living finding the truth hidden in the numbers, and the numbers never lie. Have you ever had a family member try to use your hard work against you? How did you take back your power? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. The harrowing journey of Maya against her deeply toxic and entitled in-laws offers a profound lesson about the true nature of power. It vividly illustrates that genuine strength does not stem from inherited wealth, societal privilege, or a prestigious family name, but rather from unyielding self-reliance and undeniable competence. Throughout the story, Chloe and her family wielded their privilege and old money as weapons, assuming these superficial shields made them completely invincible. They severely underestimated Maya simply because she came from a working-class background and had to build her empire from scratch. However, their blinding arrogance became their ultimate downfall. Maya's victory was not achieved through screaming, throwing tantrums, or stooping to their level of petty cruelty. Instead, she triumphed through her meticulous education, her sharp intellect, and her flawless understanding of her own professional worth. This narrative serves as a powerful reminder that when you build your foundation on hard work, undeniable skills, and the truth, no one can easily tear it down. Toxic people will often try to use your dedication against you or make you feel inferior to elevate their own fragile egos. Yet when you refuse to internalize their malicious projections and instead focus on mastering your craft, you become utterly untouchable. Maya did not need to be saved by a cowardly partner or accepted by an elitist society. Her independence and intelligence were her absolute greatest protectors. We must all strive to cultivate our own internal fortresses, relying on our own capabilities rather than the conditional approval of those who seek to diminish us. Step into your own power today, invest deeply in your personal growth, and never let anyone's toxic insecurities make you doubt your undeniable worth.